Today, we will be discussing essential aspects of the coffee supply chain with a special focus on how gender issues impact sustainability. We'll tackle high-level questions and drill down into specifics. And we'll close with a Q&A that will allow you to ask your own questions of our panelists. So please enter your questions in the chat. There's a special Q&A chat here. So separate from the chat to everyone, you can also specifically ask questions in the Q&A. And we'll tackle as many as we can at the end before we finish up. Now, I'd like to remind you that this session will be recorded and it will be available afterward for re-listening and for sharing. On the note of listening and sharing, I'd like to level set this conversation by reminding us that the coffee world is much bigger than we are. It's our responsibility to do our best to listen and to assimilate the perspectives of those who are in different shoes than we are. This is how we show respect, and we ensure that the world that we are creating can survive beyond us. Our four panelists have very different expertise and experiences, and they will share their own unique perspectives. I'm sure you're as excited as I am to experience this dynamic conversation. So this event is made possible by the generosity of Pacific Foods, as well as by your support. I want to thank you for taking the time from your busy schedules to show up for this important conversation. USWIC is proud to contribute to the global conversation in coffee and to provide support for women who work in coffee everywhere, thereby supporting countless families and small businesses around the world. Let's get started. All right. The coffee supply chain as we know it is a complex mix of economics, logistics, finance, agriculture, marketing, and human investment, much of which is driven by women. In your perspective and in your own experience, what are some of the unique challenges facing women in coffee today? Let's have Phyllis kick us off.
Hello. Thanks, Emily, for the question. Thanks for allowing the elder person to speak first, I guess. It's such a great thing to be here. I don't want to spend too much time just thinking about what I'm thinking about, talking about what I'm thinking about, but it's always nice to be connected with the International Women's Coffee Alliance. It's kind of like watching the next generation of the birth take place. Your question about the challenges that women face in embedding themselves in the supply chain is quite difficult. Women are in the supply chain. It's just that we're most often in the areas where we are contributing physical labor with a little return on investment. The closer you get to where there's real exchange of money and trade, we're not there, is what I found. So we're kind of pushed back to a spot in the supply chain. And even in those places where there's closer proximity to greater value in the supply chain, women take lesser roles within those organizations. So there's this constant migration, I think, for women, no matter what the part of the supply chain is, we always become we settle at the lowest end. And I think it's up to us, and it's up to all of us to not be comfortable with that, to find ways to embed women in decision-making roles, not just the women who are, we should never be comfortable with the women who are only picking cherries. Who's in your trading room? Who's your supply base? Who's in charge of marketing? All of those things are opportunities to gain incredible wisdom and knowledge from people that carry a different sort of message and a different perspective on life and how things should happen. So I think one of the biggest challenges is how we see women, how we as women see ourselves, but how everyone as a whole, how the entire society and environment responds to us as women. This should not be something that's unique, right?
Thank you, Phyllis. Stephany, can you add your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I feel very fortunate that I have had the chance to work in a lot of steps in the supply chain. But talking about the origin side a little bit, I had the opportunity to work for a large exporter, and I come from a coffee producing family. And I would say that I would summarize that there are two very clear challenges in the case of, I see it clearly in Guatemala, but I'm pretty sure this is the people from other Latin American countries will relate to this. First, the cultural sexism, like machismo. It makes it really, really difficult for women to be taken seriously in negotiation positions or leadership positions. So I would say that a very important barrier that needs to be broken is that cultural barrier overall. And it's not an easy task, but definitely it can be done. Like other countries have demonstrated that it can be done, and there's just a path that we need to follow. And the other one are the safety issues. I think that we as women, being in positions of negotiation, carrying cash, being exposed to be seen as, oh, that person is rich or has money or something, makes you feel exposed to many different issues that have been very hurting in our society, like kidnaps, or risking members of your family or stuff like that, which is like common. I would say probably less common nowadays, but it's still a big problem. And it keeps women from even wanting to be in those positions at some point. Overall, I think in other areas, I've seen kind of like more of a balance, like logistics, for example. I think women are very skilled for logistics because it needs to be very detail oriented. So overall, I think that's, I've seen more women doing that. And also in sales, I would say that sales is like a great, I see a lot of representation in sales positions overall, even at Origin or here. But yeah, there are definitely these two challenges that specifically in Latin America or in Origin countries, we need to look for a way to tackle. And probably the safety situation doesn't refer just to women, it's just unsafe overall. And it's just, we're just more vulnerable to these things.
Thank you, Stephany. Astute points. Amaris, can you add?
Sure, yeah. I definitely see what you were saying, Phyllis. I feel it similarly. Like, I think a lot of it has to do with the perspective that others place. Like, I do feel a lot of the women that I know here in their jobs, like, have to feel the need to prove themselves with more technical credentials because they're not seen as being capable, like cuppers or like precise roasters. And we feel like the need to prove more because we're not seen maybe as being that way. But then also I feel like there's the burden, there's like an emotional burden where we're given a lot of leadership of people maybe because we are perceived as being more nurturing or something. But then I had a coworker who called it like the gift of sight. Like a lot of the time, I think it's usually the marginalized person who sees even if it's unintentional, like the exploitation of our capacity, and we find ways to work around it. So I've had the pleasure of working with tons of amazing women who, even if it's not in their job description, they're going to see what's falling through the cracks and they're going to do it anyway. So there's a lot of invisible labor that gets done, whether that's emotional labor or real, like tangible labor. And I think because women are so capable of that multitasking and zooming in and zooming out and noticing the smaller details, we actually are really uniquely capable of things like logistics, like you were saying, Stephany, but I think it's not seen. And a lot of the time it's because people aren't primed to see that. There's still that societal perception of women being a certain way or being capable of a certain type of work. So there's so much unseen labor that gets done. And I know that's probably true of many roles along, like for all actors in supply streams. There in the documentary for Gender in Coffee done by PGE, I think one of the women who's being interviewed says, for every one step a man takes, a woman takes like 2,000 or something like that. And I think that's probably pretty true in most roles all along the supply chain.
Thank you so much. Just a reminder to everyone who's with us today, we have a special channel where you can enter questions for us to answer at the end. It's called Q&A. You can see it at the bottom of your screens. Please do ask us questions and we'll answer them at the end. So this brings me to talking more specifically about the role of being a female coffee buyer. We know that historically it's dominated by men, and there are a number of reasons for that. But I would like to hear specifically, Amaris, as a green coffee buyer for Joe Coffee, give us your perspective on what are some of the challenges facing female coffee buyers, and also some examples of ways in which you or those that you've observed are overcoming and answering those challenges. Thank you.
No, I'll just be saying thank you to you guys for letting me be here today. But yeah, that's a huge one for sure. I think a lot of lack of education, lack of access to training, all those technical credentials that are often needed in these kinds of roles. You know, a lot of people think unless you're a Q grader, you can't do anything or prove yourself. And not to say that's not true. I think those are really important standards for the industry. But a lot of women aren't given those opportunities. There's a big cost to take them. There's a big time commitment to take those types of courses. And a lot of employers, I think, if we're talking about equity, we have to talk about the things that might limit certain types of people to be able to access those trainings. So what are we doing to make it possible for women to really take those opportunities and then give those women those opportunities? So I think for me specifically, I don't run the whole company. I run the roastery and green departments, but investing in women, hiring people of color, and being able to really offer a lot of education and access, there's no reason not to, especially now. I think that those are opportunities that as a young person in coffee, many years ago, I didn't see many women in roasting or green coffee buying roles. And it's amazing how much has changed in a short amount of time. But I think to be able to be inspirational to the women who are coming up in the industry, that psychological barrier sometimes, because we're so engrossed in a society where maybe it's not seen for women to work in certain types of labor or harder labor. There's so many hard labor jobs in this area of coffee. I remember one of the first times I think I met with a group of coffee roasters when I was younger. I moved to New York City in 2013, and a woman asked me, do you think it would be possible to work in roasting because I'm not strong enough? And I was like, oh gosh, that should never be something that we consider we're incapable of something because someone else has told us we're incapable. There are so many machines and things that make those types of things possible if that were an actual issue, but also your employer should be helping you, meet some of those things. So I think investing in women, creating opportunities, eliminating barriers to access education, and putting your money where your mouth is. A lot of these credentials do take up time and resources. You should be investing in those opportunities for women.
Thank you, Amaris, and thank you also for sharing your own personal story here. Definitely have seen that a fair amount. Stephany, we had discussed a little bit in our rehearsal here about this access to education and resources at origin. Can you speak to that from your experience in Guatemala and Latin America?
Yes. Well, I've seen in case of the origin countries, we have certain access to situations or topics like quality control, but pretty basic now. Technology, I think, has made it easier to find certain resources, but there's still a gap in the commercial aspect. I think one of the most important things for farmers or for people at origin is to be able to commercialize their coffee in a better way, in a more sustainable way. And I think there's still lack of information regarding how to sell your coffee better, what to do. And that's part of the things. In my case, I try to share a little bit of what I've learned with my experience through the coffee school and cafe. But I feel like there's still so much to do. And actually networks like IWCA have been like life-changing for a lot of people I know. And for me, in my case too, I joined the Guatemalan chapter like some years ago, and it was an amazing resource of information, just connecting with people who have done things before you or who can share their mistakes as well. Not only what's been successful, but what has failed. It's priceless, like I feel like these type of things really help you thrive. And this is very important, and it plays an amazing role especially connecting other women. Because, for example, in my case, my family, we were just women mainly. So my cousin was the owner of the farm. She's the owner of the farm. And she was never wanting to join any coffee association because it's like, what are we going to do there? They're just men. Like, we can't do it. And when finally we found the Guatemalan chapter of Women in Coffee, it was life-changing because we felt like comfortable going, sharing our stories, asking questions without being judged as like, oh, you can't do this. Or, you know, like sometimes you feel the eyes here like saying you can't. So yeah, I feel like this has this type of spaces, and if we can just share what we know or from our experience, that can make a real difference in people's lives.
Phyllis, you've spent most of your career creating spaces for women and other marginalized people in coffee to have positions of representation and be able to see more ahead of them. Can you speak to this as well? Education and access for women, particularly in coffee, and your experience?
Yeah. When Stephany was talking about being associated with the IWCA chapter in our country, it's just true. Women do tend to share. I don't know what it is about women. And, you know, I always say whenever I'm talking about gender or racial equity, that I'm not a person that discounts anyone else, but I am a person who will speak up when I feel as though there's a lack of representation in the room. And I will not carry the burden of feeling like I'm being sexist or racist, because that won't do anyone any good. So I refuse to carry that. And so when I talk about women, when I talk about race, it's not just because of the fact that I'm a Black woman with the perspective that have had the chance to be in spaces where few Black women have ever been, or Black people in general, or women in general. It's because I know that there's different pieces of information. There's different ways of looking at things that we all bring to the table. And if it's not there, then we all miss out. And so I don't feel that I'm just fighting for myself or trying to create space for other people. I feel this need to fight for the sustainability and the existence of the industry. It's well beyond my own personal individual needs or those that I can help anyone else gain. It's, you know, when you think about coffee, you've read the history of coffee, and I love the history of coffee. I love understanding or reading the history of coffee, and you understand that the most significant thing about coffee is that it has persisted. In spite of everything that has happened, it is as fragile and remarkable, but it has persisted. And there's something that is very magical that brings all of us together to this table to talk about the things that we don't even want to talk about. And it's the thing that coffee gives us to do over it, in spite of it, under it, through it. It's all of those things that allow us to be us. And so when I try to create space, it really is creating space to continue to persist, to live, to exist, and be in everybody's life what is meant to be. You know, I hope that's not too hypothetical, but that's kind of how I see it.
No, I think that probably the rest of us are also in chills and shivers and remembering exactly why we're here. So thank you so much for that, Phyllis. I'm so struck by what you said, that the most significant thing about coffee is that it's persistent. And, you know, when we talk about coffee sustainability, we talk about a lot of angles. One of those, of course, is the actual coffee itself. Will it persist? And so I want to talk a little bit about the concept of sustainability through the lens of each of your own experience. Abby, you are farming in Hawaii, in Kona, And you have a unique set of variables for your coffee operation. So I'd like you to share with us the way that you and your team are approaching sustainability in regards to your coffee and what you see as well in Hawaii, and also some of the unique angles that the gender question is taking for you in Hawaii. Big question. Tackle it however you like.
Yeah, that's a big one, and I didn't even have a note for that one. But yeah, gosh, Phyllis, like, amen, sister. Like, that coffee is persistent, and what's gonna be is gonna be. And here in Hawaii, we've just been hit really hard this last winter with coffee leaf rust. And while so many other growing regions have somewhat figured out how to overcome it, work around it, whatever. For us, it's still really new, and but we're reminded that coffee is persisting, and we are finding ways to overcome it or go around it, or do what we need to do. And so one of the things that I love about coffee is, while it allows us to be us, it also brings us all together, right? All of us women here. It brings families together, and here in Hawaii, we like to talk a lot story, and so that's super special to us. But for us, sustainability is a tricky word. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And from producer to producer, it could be so many myriads of things, from being mindful of water usage to our waste consumption, all of those things, to really, for us, it's about people and profits, and what we're doing to allow for coffee farming to continue from my generation to my son's to his, and so on and so forth. And for us, we wake up every day and approach this idea of farming from the perspective of, what can we do to give back to our community, and what can we do that allows us to produce an honest, delicious, special cup of coffee without taking more than we need. Because Hawaiian culture, you're taught that you only take what you can use, and whatever you take that you don't use, you give to the neighbor or to the next village, or what have you. But being in Hawaii, we have so many challenges. As far as, first, we're on an island, it's so difficult to get anything. We heard something during the pandemic that was shared with us by a longtime uncle, neighbor, who has been on island for a long time. And he said, Abby, did you realize that if something happened and these boats couldn't come in and bring things to us, we only have enough food resources to last us 4 days if something were to shut down. And so that was like a huge eye opener for me. That's just for us as residents. That doesn't include the tourists that come and whatnot. So, and to bring anything in, it's really, really expensive. And so for us, going back to the challenges, is that right, Emily? Refresh my mind. But
yes, talking about challenges and potential solutions for sustainability questions.
Yeah. So one of the big challenges for us is not being able to have labor. Labor is super hard to come by. And so now we result in either losing our crop or having to buy really expensive machinery to process coffee, to sort coffee, to do all of the things to make that happen. And so understanding kind of what that high cost of production is here, from a green buyer's perspective, that they can understand what that costs and why it costs so much, build a relationship with us producers, kind of helps with the sustainability of coffee here in Hawaii.
Thank you so much, Abby. I realize I lobbed quite a large question at you. That was a fantastic answer. So on the topic of sustainability, let's dive a little bit into that. So of course, sustainability is a word that we're tossing around a lot right now, and it's deeply impactful to our supply chain. Stephany, will you share with us your thoughts around the challenges right now to sustainability in green coffee, and also solutions that you've seen or even that you're watching or thinking about?
Yeah, sure. Well, I like to see sustainability according to the triple bottom line with the 3 Ps, if you have heard of it, because I think it makes it really simple to understand, like people, planet, and profit, right? You you always need to think, hey, well, when this triple bottom line was created, I think John Elkington, who coined this term, was thinking and that it would change capitalism in a way that you would always be thinking, hey, how do I impact people? How do I impact the planet? And how do I impact profit in terms of not only what I get, but also the economic impact I have in my community, my state, my country, whatever. So in general, I think we're facing so many challenges that it makes it really difficult if we are always trying to do things, always thinking, of course, that needs to be done. How do we impact every one of these 3 axes? But if you want to create a project, if you want to do something about it, I think it's easier when you focus. So in my case, I think two key things where I feel very involved and that I feel like I'm doing my best to share and to give back. The number one would be probably the coffee school I founded. For those of you who haven't heard of it, the name is ENCAFE, ENCAFE Business School. And the purpose is to share their resources for people who want to sell their coffee better. So basically trying to impact the profit aspect or pillar. And why do I think it's important? Well, I think one of the most or the key things that we can do if we want to guarantee sustainability of coffee in the long term, one would be to guarantee sustainable economic income for the farmers, and the other one, of course, climate change, which has been super hard recently, and I think we're all living this situation, and we definitely need to do something about it. But in the case of the economic sustainability of coffee, I don't think that direct trade, like saying I can buy directly from the farmer, is realistic in terms of logistics, but it is realistic in terms of relationships. So you can have a relationship with a farmer and make sure this farmer is okay, is doing well, is getting enough money, or creating certain resources, additional resources to generate projects in the community or things like that. However, the logistics supply chain, we know it's having a direct supply chain is possible, but it's just too expensive. Can a farmer directly send me the coffee by airplane? Yes. But how much does that cost, right? Like 4 times or 5 times the cost of the coffee. So I think that generating this, even if we can just do something in this economic aspect, guaranteeing economic sustainability, we're doing or taking a huge step. And sometimes I understand that from the buyer's point of view is difficult because you're also competing with other people. You cannot go in price like over too much because that way you won't be competitive anymore. But at the same time, having this relationship and guaranteeing that the farmer is getting enough or being well paid for the product, etc., and at the same time the farmer being more involved in the sales process can make a very, very big difference. I feel like we as farmers are just used to like kind of sit there and wait for someone to come buy our coffee. And I think that needs to change. We as farmers need to take a more active position in the sales and commercial side of the whole process. And what I try to do through this coffee school is just try to teach them what's important, what buyers might be looking for, how to think about the buyer and not about this, my unique selling proposition in terms of what I think is good versus what my customer really wants and needs. how to support the roasters with marketing materials, taking pictures, how to create a newsletter, how to create a mini website on Linktree, and then direct them through to free resources like a Facebook gallery or whatever, you know, like maybe trying to take advantage of free resources in a way that makes sense for a buyer, and also trying to give them tips and make them feel closer to the supply chain and especially to the buyers. So through the business school, most of the things I do there are free. I do a lot of webinars where I interview people, for example, roasters or grain buyers or importers, people who they usually don't have access to. And it's been making a great impact because it gives them the sensation that they can. It's not so impossible, you know, like it's not that far away or it's not that unreachable. And what I like with these webinars is that I basically just started a conversation and then I let them ask. And it's been super interesting to see the basic questions that sometimes we never had anybody to answer for us. So in my case, I think I'm participating heavily and probably trying to make an impact through this, and also by supporting and participating of the Women in Coffee Alliance, because I think this is an amazing project overall, and I've seen how it can impact lives, and just being part of this chain and offering what I know, if it's useful for somebody, I think that can really make an impact, especially in this profit axis of the sustainability concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephany. And yeah, incredible initiative there. And I liked how specific you were in your examples. I think that it's often the basic educational pieces that we miss when we're attempting to improve our businesses. And women tend to be afraid to ask, or trained to be afraid to ask. Amaris, as a coffee buyer, what is your perspective on some of the challenges facing sustainability in the global coffee supply chain, and also some ways that you're seeing improvement or an attempt to make change for the better?
I'm so interested in everything you said, Stephany. Everything is so true. I think adding value to the producers who are doing things already, like I think I've seen a lot of people, like we like to talk about sustainability a lot. And I participated in this online traceability conference a couple of weeks ago that was really amazing. It brought together a lot of people from around the world, including a lot of coffee producers. And it seems like the takeaway was that there are a lot of free tools that exist out there, like WhatsApp, Facebook, like you were saying, Stephany, that that people are already taking advantage of. So I think a lot of the time it's just us maybe not paying attention about that, or encouraging a more meaningful way to use it on both sides. Like certainly technology is what's keeping us connected to each other in the pandemic, and there's so many ways to utilize these tools that I think it took a pandemic for us to really realize how to fully use them. But I also think listening to producers is something that, especially maybe like on our side here in countries where coffee is being consumed, there's there may be a disconnect between like farmers on the ground or like people in coffee countries. They're doing a lot of the work to try to combat things like climate change and trying to work to keep their businesses sustainable and afloat already. And I think a lot of the time we maybe aren't as keyed into what that is. They bear all the risks. So if it's something about your production yield being affected by some kind of natural disaster that could put your yearly income at risk, of course, you're going to try to problem solve ways to combat that. Producers are experts at creative problem solving. And I think a lot of the time we don't like the value that should come out of that. They should see some of that. So I think, like you were saying, incorporating producers into marketing and things like that, so they can get some visibility or also be like maybe see some of that value given back to them as a recognition of that hard work that they're already doing. A lot of the time it's sustainable by default because they don't have a choice, maybe, and not sustainable by design in the way we might think about it. But I think that's a lack of our perception, our creativity, being able to like see and appreciate that work. So So I think some of the challenges are, like visibility, maybe like knowing what kinds of questions to ask, and also creating spaces where we can have conversations like this that are outside of business relationships. So I created the Women in Coffee Project to be able to create a space for that, where women could get more visibility and benefit from each other's experience and expertise, and build a community that isn't related on, the couple of times a year we might speak to each other because of a purchase requirement that we might need to settle a contract or talk about quality or something like that. So I think having nonpartisan spaces, and the International Women's Coffee Alliance is an excellent example of that, to be able to connect with each other, I think helps us benefit from each other's experiences, and also keep moving forward, trying to capture that value together, but also encourage each other to do the right thing. Representation, like we've been talking about, is a big deal, but we all have a part to play. Anyone who's in a position of leadership or power can actually make a positive change to see more representation, So I think, anyway, I think I started to ramble a little bit, but there we go.
All important words, Amaris. Thank you so much. Phyllis, in your personal experience and perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges to sustainability in the global coffee supply chain?
Oh, that's a great question. When I got started in coffee, it was around sustainability and talking about what does it mean and how do we achieve that, and hearing the other panelists, frame so well what it kind of means and what it looks like. I have to think about that. And what I've come to grips with is we are operating inside of a system that's unequal and unfair. And with all the education and all the training, and no matter what we lay down within this system, it is still unfair. So we are hoping that those who are more disenfranchised become less disenfranchised. But it's an unfair system when you take a plant and put it in the ground, and 7 years later you expect it to present fruit. You harvest that. Abigaile knows this much better than any of us on this call. You dry it, you process it, you put it on a boat in a bag, and then you expect fairness as far as a trade with this product. There is no fairness in this. And that's something that we have to really think about. You can put the best scenarios together, but you're still operating in an unfair equilibrium, in an unfair environment. It's just not, it's like you need oxygen, but oxygen isn't what's present in the environment, but that's really what you need to survive. So I think having women at the table to start to say, how do we dismantle this thing that no matter how much we try to think about it, the entire system is broken, because no matter how much you train a farmer on what your needs might be as a roaster, as an importer, or whatever, you still are trying to sell a product in a system that is all mandated by something that none of us have control over. And I'm not just talking about, a seed market or anything like that, but I'm talking about just in general. Countries compete against themselves, and working in Brazil, small scale farmers who are picking coffee are competing with the commercialized mechanisms of picking coffee. So there's conflicting and competing interests everywhere. And it's a very complex system for us to try to untangle. So I think it's important that we understand how complex it is, right? But we also have to embrace the idea that we can't educate people out of oppression. It's like if someone said to me, if you were smarter, you would not have to deal with racism. My education has absolutely nothing to do with how you treat me and how you see me. And so that's kind of what we're dealing with here. And, we talk about getting engaged in these topics, in these areas of things like racial and gender equity. But I'm a strong believer that a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's just a common thing that we've all heard. And as I see more Black and Brown individuals in the industry gaining opportunities, I can sense this idea of, oh my, I can't believe, these opportunities are starting to happen. But for every Black or Brown person that's starting to try to build a business, do you know how many non-Black and Brown companies they have to rely on to exist? So when the way I see sustainability, and my husband always says, to a hammer, everything is a nail. So I'm sorry to Phyllis Johnson, everything is going to be a matter of inclusion and diversity, right? I see sustainability as bringing people to the table who's going to have more empathy, who's going to know what it feels like not to just be someone who's working, as a barista, but who's been discounted. And I think I brought this up yesterday. Put women in the room, and women are going to be the first to say, who are we not listening to? Who are we talking over? Who do we not think has the answer? Let's go get that person. That's just by nature, because that's what we deal with. That's what we expect. You're not thought to have the answer. I've been in board meetings and I thought I was crazy, where I would say something and then the guy would say exactly what I said. And then everyone would say, yeah. And you all know that. And you think you're crazy when that happens, but it happens because it's almost like it needs to be translated for someone else. And I don't know how I got on that tangent. I just needed to say that for some strange reason, but it's always about inclusion for me. It's always about asking other people, because I don't know the answer. I can market the heck out of you, but at the end of the day, the industry's still going to screw you. And that's just, unfortunately, it's unfair. And that's what we have to come to grips with, is unfair. How do we build sustainability? I think we're on a pathway. But listening, we do have to listen, and we do have to see the humanity in other people. It is really about humanity. It's about empathy. And who has that? Coffee is a business, don't get me wrong. I can sit here and talk hypothetical all day till the cows come home. But it is a business at the end of the day. And the thing that keeps it going is trade and exchange. And it is the basis in which many countries around the world exist because of the trade. But it is also a very large human element to it as well. And seeing people as people on the other end of this is the thing that we need to see and do and act upon. It's not just the sustainability of the people who work in your restaurant, but it's the people who are picking, it's the people in the middle, it's the people who are making the connections in the middle. Is actual people doing real things with real lives, with children and dreams and hopes throughout. And until we can actually see that, I think sustainability is a fleeting sort of thing that we are kind of looking through the lens of economics through. But we're saying the words, but it really is not at the core of what we believe.
Thank you, Phyllis. Wow. Bringing the word here. Everything you're saying is, I think we could talk for hours more about each of these topics. And I also think that many people in this room can resonate with the exact experiences that you're relating. Which actually leads me to my next and unfortunately final question. So important in sustainability in the supply chain is for women and marginalized people who tend to have a much larger positive effect on the people throughout the supply chain when they are put in positions of power. Important in this is upward mobility, and upward mobility for women and other marginalized people is a problem right now. So I'm going to ask each one of you to speak to specific examples that you've seen of challenge and solution or triumph in the areas of upward mobility in the coffee supply chain, please feel free to speak however you like. This will be our final group question, and then we will move on to our Q&A. Let's lead with Stephany. She looks ready to speak.
I just didn't catch the word. What?
Upward mobility, or crashing through the glass ceiling in various aspects of the supply chain and careers. Anything practical as well that can be shared with people in this room who are looking to improve their careers or find a way upward. Each of us here has reached a certain area of success and has faced a lot of challenges. So please share your own perspective, and thank you.
Sure. I think I'm going to talk maybe from my experience, but I know this is a common problem. That's what I like to talk about this. It's the imposter syndrome. I feel like sometimes as we start breaking through and having this upward mobility, we start experiencing these feelings like, am I really good enough for this? And like, did they make a mistake? Did they choose me by mistake or something like that? And it takes time, it takes time to realize that if you were chosen for a position, it's because you have the capabilities and to believe in yourself sometimes, because as you were mentioning before, we have been trained to not believe in ourselves. And I love this, that my husband always says, like, the moment women realize all their power, we're doomed. Like, they don't need us. I mean, you guys don't need us. Like, he says, like, you're capable of doing everything. It's like, you need to figure out the baby thing and you're all set. But it's true. Like, I feel like we are so powerful and sometimes we have trouble believing it. And so I would say to everybody out there who's maybe experiencing this situation where they don't feel like maybe they're doing well, and that this imposter syndrome takes us to overachieve and to overwork because we always try to prove that we are good at this. So we work more and more hours. We super go over the top with effort and trying to solve problems that sometimes probably a man in our position wouldn't go that far, because we're trying to prove ourselves. So just saying, like, if you're in this situation, don't feel alone. Number one, it happens to a lot of us. Number two, just try to be conscious about it and read about it. It helped me to read about it. The first time I read about this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a thing. It's not just me. So that was super helpful. And just be yourself, keep pushing and keep fighting for what you want. Eventually, I think if you're passionate about something, you'll find the right people to help you thrive, and you'll find the right resources. Because I feel like when you want something really bad, you can do this. You can make this happen. So don't feel alone if you're feeling that.
Thank you, Stephany. Imposter syndrome is a huge obstacle for upward mobility for women who tend to take fewer chances and require more external validation of being ready to take big steps. So,
and
agreed.
Sometimes I also,
thank you.
Sorry, thanks. Sorry to interrupt. And also sometimes, like, even negotiating salary, like,
yes,
it's been proven that women don't push for like, I need more, I want more. So also let's think about that.
Definitely. Amaris, do you have a point? I'm sure you have many points to add. Please elucidate.
I will say I think when I was younger, I had the same, like, a lot of imposter syndrome, Stephany, but then I read something somewhere that says, like, the reason we feel imposter syndrome is because, we're working in systems that were not meant to be created equal, or where we were not meant to be created equal. So, like, the reason we have this is sometimes, like, women have absorbed this societal belief that we're less than. So, like, the system already was set up to be oppressive. So if we don't think that way, it kind of helped me free up my thinking. Like, oh yeah, if I don't have to worry about that thing, I can be as good as I want to be and capable and all that stuff. So it helped me get through it a little bit too. But I think for me, the biggest thing that helped was, finding the skill set that makes me feel like uniquely capable to do the job that I do. And part of that is finding your passion, like you were saying. I think like I'm a biracial kid. I grew up in the States. I have an immigrant mom. She, I think, encouraged us to assimilate because she wanted us to be comfortable here. And when I was younger, I felt a lot of like identity conflict. Am I a Nicaraguan enough? The answer is always no. Am I American enough? The answer is always no, because I had like, you know, rice in my lunch and kids were like, ew, you know, that's weird. But I feel like the older I grew, the more I was like, you know what, I can be perfectly 100% one or the other, or any mix, anytime, and that will still make me uniquely capable to do my job. Here I have the amazing gift of a little bit of cultural fluency that can provide the empathy to people who I can speak to in the language that is familiar to them, and not have to have this barrier to me. And when I finally kind of felt that, and I mean, I was like 30 when I finally felt comfortable like that in my own skin, I was like, this is a monumental gift that now it makes it so real that it is a unique responsibility that there's like no version of myself, no world that I don't want to live in where I'm not using that skill set to advocate for the people who maybe are not physically present in this room. You know, I used to feel like guilty. We shouldn't speak on behalf of producers. I still don't think we should speak on behalf of producers, but you know, there is a little bit of work that we can do. If you're being empathetic and kind and you listen, you can more accurately represent another person's, you know, work ethic or values, no matter what type of job you're in. And I feel like, you know, when you find that moment that clicks for you, where your work becomes really meaningful for your sense of identity, and not in like an egotistical way, but, you know, you find that plug, it kind of doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. You're finding that joy and meaning, and you can really get a better grasp on what it takes to be like proud and engaged in your work. I think every one of us has that unique skill set. And when we have folks here that I work with in our roastery or other parts of the company, maybe mentorship is something that can help other people unlock that in themselves. I think a lot of women and marginalized people, they maybe don't have access to those types of relationships where people really want to prove and engage with them and invest in them. So I started a mentorship program here at the company, because I feel like those are ways where you can help somebody over a period of time and prove that they're worth getting to know also, you know, even if you're in a different reporting line or something like that, like their happiness and meaning in their job is worth investing in. So I would say for most women out there, like there are so many things that you're the only person on earth that's uniquely capable of doing that thing. And it's worth spending the time to figure out what it is, and it'll make everyone's lives like so much more better.
Incredible, Amaris. Thank you. Abby, your thoughts on upward mobility and how that impacts the coffee supply chain and sustainability. Pick apart any aspect of that you'd like to address, please.
Yeah, so upward mobility. I just have to say that I have been super blessed and fortunate to have had different experiences and have worked for companies that have been very just full of girl power. Like my dad has just always been that person, and it's not necessarily just girl power, it's everyone's power. How can any one of us, regardless of gender or race or ethnicity, like what can we do to make the place that we live better, and what everybody has something to offer. And I feel like I have spent so many times, especially recently, I've always been like super powerful, and I could really like walk into any situation and be comfortable doing what I was doing, and I was good at it. And then coffee happened, and now people are asking me to talk, and I just want to show you, just come and see. I feel like, gosh, I'm not good at that, right? Or I don't know how to do that. Or if, like we were talking yesterday, Phyllis, when I said, you know, like, oh my gosh, if my dad died, how would I do this? You know, I don't know that I know how to do it. And it wasn't necessarily because somebody was not teaching me. It was this reality that, oh, this is another part that I should learn how to do, and being self-taught. And I'm always a student. And so I've spent so much of my new career, short 8 years of being in coffee, apologizing for myself, apologizing that I didn't have, you know, gosh, I've only been doing coffee for 8 years. I'm not sure this is what you want to hear, but, you know, this is kind of what I'm seeing from the outside. always making my perspective be from outside. And then I started to allow emotion to come in and letting it be like, take over my emotion and making it about emotion. I'd be really emotional. What man wants to see emotion? They don't, right? I had a situation happen here last year. It was just before the whole Black Lives Matter big rivalry happened, and we were doing a webinar and for an association that I'm a part of. And it was brought to our attention that all of our panelists were white. All of our panelists were, they were white. And it was like, you know what? We need to do something different. We need more women, and we need some people of color, somebody that is not white. And so I spoke up, and it did not go over well, right? And then another speaker who was a man decided he wasn't going to participate unless he spoke up, and they brought in some differences. And that like really, like, I cried at a board meeting. I cried, and I'm like, why am I apologizing for this? So my advice would be, number one, to take take some of the emotion out and allow passion to fill its place instead of emotion, and stop apologizing. Stop apologizing for being a woman, stop apologizing for not having experience, find a mentor, find a company like Monarch Coffee that embraces women and ideas that women have, or, all ideas, it embraces all ideas, regardless of experience, gender, or race. And just stop apologizing would be my advice for upward mobility.
I think that's good, practical, actionable advice, Abby. Phyllis, I'm going to leave it to you to recap or to end for us. What do you think about the concept of upward mobility in coffee?
Yeah, listening to that small voice inside of you, because as women, we don't listen. There's a small voice that's always trying to get our attention. And sometimes we don't know where it's coming from, or it's just always there. And it's always saying to be a little bit bolder than you are. And so I just recommend that you really try to tune your listening to that small voice. And that small voice can be, a bigger spiritual meaning for you, but listen to that small voice because it has the confidence that you need. Lift others. For me, it's lifting others. And when you talk about where there was triumph, for me, there was a real triumph. I wrote a book in 2020, and it is entitled Triumph, Black Brazilians in Coffee, because that small voice said to me, don't write a one-page piece about the Black Brazilian coffee producers. You've looked for these people, these incredible people for 7 years, write a book. And I wrote a book, and Connie at Roast helped me in naming the book Triumph. And it has been an incredible story, not just, for coffee, but within their own country. They're continuously getting recognition for their work and acknowledgement. I think I got something today from someone who was there from the local television stations to interview someone who was in the book there in Brazil. So you don't know what you're doing when you listen to those small voices, because you will not believe that it's you. When you talk about imposter syndrome, I remember the UN International Trade Center asked me to do some work with them to help build the IWCA chapters in East Africa. Here I am working with women throughout East Africa as doing the work that they were hoping that I could help them to build, doing it already, right? Have built a company that's building relationships with women in East Africa. And they say, hey, can you develop a program for us? And I'm like, it's not me, I can't do it. And thinking about what Abigaile said, I had all these reasons why it wasn't me. And not only did I had the reasons why it wasn't me, I actually put together a list of people I felt who would be better than me. I mean, I even went to that step. But know that it is you, because when you free yourself of bad relationships and oppressive situations, that's when real liberation comes. When you've had to cry over some stuff because it's not been right, that's when you're free to actually get to real stuff and real work. So don't be afraid to get too emotional about stuff, because it's meant for you to do something about it. I wish I didn't care about some of this stuff sometime, but it's not so much that I care so much about it. It's something that's underlying and that's underpinning it that I don't always fully understand. And sometimes that's what you're trying to get to. So I think I've given you more than enough hyperbole today. I'm sorry.
Phyllis, I think we're all here for it.
It's funny because as we talk about women and we have to show up, I'm thinking, why did I have to wear this necklace today and put on this color? It's because as a woman, I feel like I not only have to know everything I need to know, but I got to show up with everything. And show up with everything. If it's what makes you comfortable, if it's what makes the folks around you comfortable, put it on, show up with it, and show out. Just we need you. Do it. Stop wasting your time and just listen to the small voices. Get the big work done, because it's us who are left to do it. So, sorry.
Thank you, Phyllis. All right, we are going to segue into our Q&A section, but I would like to kind of mark this first full session. Thank you all for attending, for your insightful questions. Panelists, thank you for your remarkable answers. I'm sure that I can speak for our entire audience and say that today is deeply inspiring for me, both as a woman in coffee and as someone who cares about women in coffee. And women have a splashover effect onto men and children, future leaders. We as women carry the entire industry, regardless of what our hands actually perform. So this is an essential conversation for us to have. All right, let's move into a Q&A. We have about 20 minutes, so we're going to try to keep this really quick. Got some great questions, and I'm going to start with our first question. Amaris, I'm going to direct this at you because I think you've got some unique experience to speak to this. What are some questions that we can ask farmers or suppliers to push the envelope on equality or verify treatment around everyone being equal?
Oh yeah, that's great. And so big. I mean, first, I guess I'll reiterate what I said earlier. I think you're more likely to get responsible, correct answers when there's no power dynamic in play. So if you're only speaking to a producer at the time you're trying to purchase their coffee or nail down a contract, I would say that's probably not the best time to get the answers that you might think you're looking for, because there's risk. And we like to talk a lot about opportunity or choice. I had the opportunity to work with this producer and I chose to take it. Maybe producers don't always have the same range of options or choice. So limiting they may choose to show up for the answers that you want so they can secure the purchase. And I don't think that's always fair. So maybe engage in these conversations outside of those kinds of purchasing windows. Maybe speak to them all year round, try to build a foundation of trust. Maybe also offer to give context for why you want that information. What is it that you want to get out of that information? And are you going to be using it somewhere? Sharing their financials maybe isn't something they're interested in if you're going to put it out there for all of your customers to see. So maybe get their permission first if you're going to be doing it like that. But in general, I think it's easy to be straightforward if you have those kinds of foundations set. I've certainly benefited from being able to speak to someone all year round. I would say also be prepared for what kind of answers you're getting. If you're talking about equity and fair treatment or fair prices, and you're asking a producer how much they're paying their laborers, be prepared to be told that you're probably not paying enough to them for them to be able to meet those goals. If they want to pay people more, but they're not able to make that happen. I don't know, I would say be prepared for a lot of those hard conversations. And that actually should be, in my mind, I think that being uncomfortable is kind of part of the process. If you're comfortable, a lot of the time you're probably doing just enough to make yourself feel comfortable. You maybe probably not getting out there to be able to see where you could potentially do more or do what is actually needed, because maybe you just don't have the ability to see everything. And so inviting someone in and getting their perspective is key. And I think that probably will be able to give you the information that you want. But when it comes to equity, I would say ask a variety of people too. If you're working with a particular producer, maybe they have an issue that's shared by all of their neighbors. Maybe you can ask like the exporter. We were talking about that in the rehearsal yesterday. Like exporters play a huge role in what's going on in the country where the coffee is grown. Maybe ask some other folks about what's going on in a certain area so you can get a little bit more information. So maybe rely on the people in your supply stream. But asking direct questions, I think, is really wonderful. Just be prepared for some big conversations.
Munoz, really, really insightful answer. The fact that power dynamics impact these conversations is often overlooked, and it's a key. Power dynamics are implicit in everything we do in this supply chain. Stephany, you look like you have something to add. Please jump in.
Yeah, I just would like to add something real quick. And there's this gender inequality index that measures how equal a society seems to be in opportunities for men and women. But the three aspects that this index kind of score, or like, how do you say, like, yeah, it scores are access to health, empowerment, which is like in terms of politics, and economic position or status. What I would say also, if we want to make things change, especially at our origin, the coffee sector is not any different. You know, we have politics, we have economic status, and we have access to health. Access to health apart, let's focus on politics and economics. I think we can, if we have seen the politics of coffee, there is a lot of underrepresentation. So we can push, like as buyers, as consuming countries, for origin countries to give more representation to women in boards, you know, stuff that related to politics, to coffee policies and stuff like that. I think that can be also a great start to make things change, because most of the things won't change if the rules keep being made by men, right? So, I mean, without considering that inclusion. So I would just say that, like, keep it in mind. And if you have a chance to meet someone, keep pushing for it. Like, ask, hey, how many women are in this board? Try to just maybe let it in, like let the thought and just plant the seed. It will make a difference in the future. Probably we won't see it right away, but people will start realizing that things need to change.
Thank you, Stephany. We have another really great question here. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to ask Phyllis to address it first, and then Abigaile to step in, and other panelists, please feel free to jump in as well. When younger, seeing mostly men in positions of power as CEOs, for example, I've always thought I needed to look and sound more masculine to accomplish the same achievements. Looking at you today, I feel our inner power, and it's so inspiring. Thank you for that. As I said, or as said here and in so many other places, women are getting more qualifications in order to prove themselves. Between education and economic empowerment, which one is more important in growing countries? Phyllis.
You know, sometimes when we're given truths that we just don't believe, it's hard to absorb them. And the one thing I learned when I went to graduate school is that this idea that education will lift people out of poverty isn't true. And I remember sitting in my economics class when the professor said that, and I literally had to just squirm in my seat, because I had used education to help lift myself out of, a poor situation growing up in Arkansas. And I'm thinking, how can this person say this? This is untrue. So for the rest of the semester, the professor dissected this idea of where education had actually not helped people. And I think it was in Tanzania was one area that we really examined, but it's not true. It's not true across the board. Nothing is true in a vacuum, right? There are so many elements to make things true or to make things untrue. So what I realized is that we can't always put together the best formula for success. And that's why it's so important to have that fight inside of you and to explore those ideas that are coming to you, because we always talk about getting women ready. And I say this with the most respect that anyone can have. I have been one of few women who have sat at tables with men who are not educated at all. So I oftentimes think about my first job out of college. I was the only Black person in the position, and the only people who had a degree higher than high school was me and the person 3 levels above me, who was the CEO. So my boss didn't need a degree, my boss's boss didn't need a degree, my boss's boss's boss didn't need a degree, but me and the CEO did. So sometimes we say we need stuff that we don't need. But here's what I will also say is that use the things as tools. I love education because it gives me the enrichment that I enjoy, that I can speak from, I can learn. It gives me joy in life. But I know that society doesn't look at education the same on me as it would if I were white, if I were male. The education is not going to play out in my life in that same way. So, and as women, we always feel like we got to be if someone invites me to something, the first thing I think of, I got to lose weight. And I'm like, why do I think that? Because I'm always thinking I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. There's a better version of me that's still out there. But you know what? You are good enough. Just like you are, go for it right now. With that extra 5 or 50 pounds, just stop. And so I don't know if that answered your question. Thank you for the compliment. But yeah, education is great, but you're not going to reap the same benefit as everybody else because you are playing with the hand that society has given to you that lessens your overall value, if that makes sense, which I'm sure it does.
Thank you, Phyllis. I'd like to restate this question. Abby is having connectivity issues, so we're going to hope that she's able to hop back on. But either way, direct this restatement of the same question to Amaris and Stephany. So education and economic empowerment. Phyllis just built us a really compelling case as to why those are not always going to pan out the way that we expect, depending on our variables. So what I'm interested in hearing is how are education and economic empowerment entwined in growing countries? Because obviously it costs money and it requires privilege and leisure time to be able to have further education. And even knowing what exists is in itself a privilege. So Stephany, can you speak to that in your experience in Guatemala? And then Amaris, I'd be interested to hear your perspective as well. And this, I think, may be our last question.
Yeah, well, I can side with Phyllis in terms of like the formal education, how it's seen and how the system has certain rules under which we operate under unequal conditions. But also I like to see education from an informal point of view, like just in terms of learning. Yeah, she was saying, I love education, not because of the titles I can achieve, but also because it makes me better, right? And make better or take better decisions. So I want to give this very brief example of case or things that I've seen in Guatemala. It's like if you empower people with money but don't teach them how to use it, it's the same. It won't go anywhere. It won't translate into a more quality of life or a better quality of life. For example, in the rural areas, I have this friend, she's originally from Japan, and she is in Guatemala doing all these social projects related to teach people how to produce their own food. But not only how to produce the food, she also helps them to cook it. So part of the project was also teaching them what to use with what to get nutrients, how to create new recipes or incorporate these things in their daily life. Because then what happened was they would get paid in rural areas, especially this was happening. They would get paid, and then the celebration of getting the money was going to the store or the local shop and buying a soda and a lot of chips and kind of like eating that, right? And then they ran out of money, and then there's nothing else to eat. While you have most people in the rural areas have very humble houses, but they have a little plot of land right there that can grow food. But instead of like investing this money in just growing their own food and eating better and healthier, they didn't have the education to know that this was better than this, you know, pretty basic, right? So in terms of that, I think education is more important just empowering people with money, because it can make a longer term change or a long-term change. Yeah, that would be my opinion.
Thank you, Stephany. Amaris.
Yeah, I agree. Similarly, like as a person, I'm one of the people that like to learn something because I am suspicious of the people who are teaching it to me. Maybe it's like, you tell me in this course curriculum, this is important. Is that true? You know, I don't know. So I've always pursued education as a way to learn more, to be able to say for myself, definitively, I've studied it enough, and I kind of have like a research mindset, make sure that it's worthwhile. I don't, maybe that's an independence thing. I don't like other people telling me about it, but I do think that I've certainly seen, like, especially in my family in Nicaragua, and I've seen some coffee farmers similarly, like a lot of them choose, you know, like if they have extra money left over, you know, they often choose to send their kids to school. They'll prioritize education because they think that will lead to opportunities for more economic empowerment later on. And a lot of the time that means they accept that this isn't going to be coffee farming in the future, potentially. I definitely met a coffee farmer in Colombia who said, I fully accept I'm probably going to be the last person to take care of this farm, because I have worked really hard to be able to give my children the choice. I didn't have the choice. So if they choose this, that's fine. I don't think they will, though, because it's not economically viable. So I do think maybe coffee is uniquely capable of providing that like informal education. There's nothing to say that being able to have like cupping skills, quality skills, I know there's Q processing in coffee growing countries, to be able to like really understand the value of the thing that they're producing, to be able to market it more effectively, to give them like options and opportunities. And that doesn't have to be done by any particular organization, but I have seen a lot of that. There are really amazing companies like Caravella is an importer that we work with, and they've made a choice to hire you know, so many kids of coffee farming families in the regions where they work, because there's, you know, it gives more it adds more economic empowerment on top of being an educational experience. They learn how to work in purchasing stations and sample roasts and green grading, gives them opportunities that maybe is not just super specific to farming, but also benefits their family business. So I think actually coffee is kind of incredible in that way. And maybe that's one of the reasons why that persistence is something that a lot of people have invested in, to be able, because I mean, our businesses are dependent on that. You know, if we want to be around and have our jobs in 10, 20 years, you know, it's important that everybody has access to those kinds of choices and be able to understand that value. So I think coffee is a really great industry to work in that sense, like in agricultural regions or in regions that are high levels of poverty, they can potentially offer both economic empowerment and education at the same time. But I probably would skew more toward education, because then it might give up people the opportunity to find out what they do want. You know, they also should have the opportunity to see if that's something that they're uniquely capable of, that they're qualified in, that they want to choose, like they choose to pursue. I think they should be given a choice. a lot of the time, I think we romanticize it a lot, that people are choosing to work in coffee in these regions because they're so passionate about coffee and they really, really care about coffee, when a lot of the time it maybe is just a job. They should be able to choose if that's something they want to do or not.
Well, I am deeply regretful to say that this is the end of our session. I want to acknowledge the brilliance that's gathered in this room, not just our panelists, but also our attendees. It is an honor to have been your moderator today and to have helped organize this. I want to make a shout out to Monsi, who helped me with many of the details to pull this off, as well as the rest of the USWIC board. Thank you all so much for bringing your entire selves to this. And I hope that we've provided some value that you can take away, share with your friends and with your fellow career professionals. And please join us in February for our next session. It's going to be about sustainability storytelling and all of those fascinating and challenging dilemmas that we find ourselves in, both around ethics and practicality. Have a wonderful day. Bye.